After my husband's funeral, my daughter delivered her ultimatum: get a job or get out. In desperation, I agreed to become the caregiver of a paralyzed billionaire. What I discovered that first night shattered my world. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to listen. Stay here with me through this whole story and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my stories travel. You have to understand, Tiffany didn't just shove me toward a job. She detonated something. She thought she was being efficient, smart, solving the problem of me without raising her voice or dirtying her hands. A neat little plan: relocate the widow, clear the space, resume her curated life. What she didn't know, what she never even paused to consider, was who she was sending me to. The man waiting on the other side of that marble threshold wasn't just some lonely recluse in need of help. He was a ghost from before her, before the marriage, before the life she believes she understands. And she handed me right to him like I was luggage. So if you're wondering how a daughter's selfish little eviction notice triggered a chain of events that unearthed decades of buried history, if you're curious how a cold ultimatum led to revelations, regrets, and one final shot at something most women never get back, follow me, because this isn't just a story about a mother scorned. It's about a past that refused to stay buried. And it all started with footsteps, slow, surgical, and echoing through a house that hadn't even finished grieving yet. She didn't knock. Tiffany never knocked. I was rinsing a teacup when I heard her heels, sharp, practiced, unapologetic, cut through the quiet like a judge entering a courtroom. By the time I turned, she was already halfway into the kitchen. Still in her work blazer, still wearing her lipstick like armor, and already scrolling through something more important than me. I dried my fingers on a towel, careful not to speak first. She set her handbag on the counter with a thud and inhaled like she was about to deliver a company-wide memo. We need to talk. What is it? This arrangement isn't working. I stared at her. It's been 3 weeks since your father died. I know, and I have 2 kids, a full-time job, and a mortgage. I can't carry you forever. I flinched. Tiff, I never asked you to. You didn't have to. She pulled up something on her phone. There's a job, companion care, no credentials needed, just basic assistance. You were a nurse before, right? That was over 40 years ago. You'll be fine. I already sent your information. Your interview's tomorrow. My stomach dropped. You're deciding this for me? She finally looked up from her screen. You're not contributing. I'm sorry, Mom, but you either take the job or find somewhere else to live. It landed like a stone in water. No argument, no empathy, just a line drawn clean through the kitchen tile. That night, I packed a suitcase. The next morning, I walked into a stranger's mansion, ready to serve someone I didn't know, with nowhere else to go. What I found there wasn't a job, it was a reckoning. And for Tiffany, it was the beginning of the end. The iron gate groaned open like it was annoyed to let me in. I eased my modest sedan up the winding driveway, surrounded by trees clipped into shapes too precise to be natural. It was the kind of estate you'd expect to see in a magazine spread about wealth that never had to apologize for itself. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The house ahead looked like something built for royalty or reclusion. I'd been to country clubs smaller than this place. I parked off to the side, adjusted my blouse in the rearview mirror, and told myself to breathe. I hadn't been to a job interview since the Carter administration, and certainly never one where I showed up with a suitcase in the trunk just in case I got the position. I hated how prepared that made me feel, like I already knew I'd have nowhere else to go. The front door opened before I even knocked. A woman stepped out, straight-backed, mid-50s, with gray-streaked hair tied in a chignon that looked painful. Her blouse was starched, her pants pressed into perfect seams. She glanced at my car, then at me. Mrs. Eleanor, I said, stepping forward. Eleanor Wright. She didn't smile. I'm Greta, house manager. You're here for the companion position? I nodded, clutching my purse tighter. She opened the door wider. Follow me. Inside, the air was cooler than outside and perfumed with something expensive and citrusy. The floors were stone, the ceilings impossibly high, and the silence was the sort that dared you to interrupt it. Greta's heels echoed down the hall as I followed her through a series of rooms, each one more intimidating than the last. A sitting room filled with carved furniture, a study with floor-to-ceiling books I doubted anyone read, a dining room where the table could seat 20, though I got the sense no one had eaten there in years. Mr. Ashford resides here full-time, she explained without turning around. He has limited mobility and requires assistance with day-to-day routines. Mornings, meal prep, medication management, light housekeeping. He has full-time medical staff for anything clinical. Your role is strictly domestic and social. I understand. He's had trouble keeping help. 17 companions in the last 2 years. I stopped walking. 17? Greta paused and glanced over her shoulder, expression unreadable. You'll see. We reached a set of large wooden doors. She didn't knock, just opened one and stepped inside. I followed. It was a library. A vast, sun-drenched space with ornate windows and furniture that whispered money with every grain of wood. And there, near the far end by the window, sat a man in a wheelchair. He was older than me by a few years, maybe mid-70s, but carried himself like someone who used to command rooms and hadn't entirely forgotten how. Silver hair swept back, strong profile, crisp black sweater, clean slacks, leather watch. But what stopped me were the eyes. Pale blue, sharp, aware, and locked on me the second I entered. Mr. Ashford, Greta announced, this is Eleanor Wright. He didn't smile. He didn't blink, just studied me like a puzzle he half remembered. Thank you, Greta, he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and unexpectedly calm. Give us a moment. Greta gave a small nod and shut the door behind her. I stepped forward, trying to ignore how my heart had started to pound. His expression hadn't changed. I waited for him to speak, but the silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, I offered a small smile. I was told you're looking for someone to help with your daily routine. He nodded, eyes still fixed on mine. And you're Eleanor? Yes, sir. Eleanor Wright. The way he said my name, slow, careful, like tasting something familiar, sent a strange shiver through me. I appreciate punctuality, he said, breaking eye contact at last. I despise small talk, and I don't tolerate incompetence. Do you think you can work with that? I swallowed. Yes, sir. He turned back to face me fully. Good, because I don't need a nurse. I need someone who won't treat me like I'm broken. He extended his hand. Let's begin. When I reached out to shake it, something electric passed between us, and in that instant, I knew this was no ordinary job, and he was no ordinary man. I followed him deeper into the library, the hush between us thick with something I couldn't quite name. Mr. Ashford moved his wheelchair with practiced ease, gliding past antique globes and glass-doored cabinets like he'd done it 1,000 times. I kept pace behind him, suddenly hyper-aware of my steps, the sound of my heels against the marble, the way my hands fidgeted against my skirt. He stopped near a small seating area, 2 armchairs positioned in front of a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. He gestured toward one of them. I sat carefully. He didn't speak right away, just studied me again, not in a leering way, not judgmental either, but intent, like I reminded him of someone he was trying to place. Where are you from, Eleanor? He asked, his tone neutral but probing. Originally, a little town called Westland, barely even shows up on a map. A flicker of something passed across his face. Not quite surprise, more like a thread pulled loose. Westland, he repeated as if testing the taste of it. That's in the north, right? Near the river? I nodded slowly. Yes. You've heard of it? His fingers tapped the armrest of his chair once, then stopped. Long time ago. He shifted slightly, as if weighing whether to say more. But instead, he looked out the tall window behind me, watching the wind move through the trees. "You were a nurse once?" "Yes," I said, "for a few years. Then I married and stepped away from it. Family became my full-time job." He nodded, still staring through the glass. "You lost your husband recently." It wasn't a question. I stiffened slightly. "Yes, 3 weeks ago." He finally looked back at me, and this time, something had changed in his gaze. There was a softness there now, something unguarded. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Thank you." We sat in silence again, but it was different now, less awkward. He seemed to be listening to the stillness between us like it carried something unspoken. "Do I seem familiar to you?" he asked suddenly. My heart skipped. I blinked. I'm not sure. "You've never seen me before, never crossed paths?" His tone was casual, but I could hear the undercurrent of something more. Curiosity, yes, but also tension. Hope, maybe. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "Should I have?" He didn't answer right away, just gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No," he murmured, "I suppose not." But he didn't look convinced. His next question came so quickly it felt rehearsed. "Do you believe in coincidence, Eleanor?" I hesitated. "I believe some things happen for a reason, even if we don't always understand the timing." That seemed to amuse him. He looked down at his hands for a moment before speaking again. "I've had 17 caregivers in 2 years. Most of them didn't last the week. Some didn't last the day." I didn't say anything. "I don't make things easy," he continued. "I don't like being pitied. I don't need company for the sake of filling silence. And I don't trust people who treat this house like a job instead of a life." I nodded. "Understood." He studied me again, long and deliberate, then leaned back slightly in his chair. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," I said before I could stop myself. That made him chuckle. A low, surprised sound. "Well," he said, that ghost of a smile returning, "maybe this won't be so boring after all." The clock on the mantel ticked quietly. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. Inside, something had shifted. He didn't know who I was yet, but something in him remembered me. And worse, something in me remembered him. The first night, I hardly slept. The room they'd assigned me was bigger than the living room in the house I'd shared with Walter. It had bay windows that opened onto the garden, thick drapes I didn't know how to close properly, and a bed that felt like I'd been dropped into a department store ad. Too soft, too high, too empty. I lay awake, listening to the wind outside and the quiet hum of this place, a house that whispered rather than creaked, full of money, secrets, and footsteps I wasn't used to hearing. Greta brought me a uniform the next morning. "He doesn't require it," she said stiffly, "but it's what the others wore. Keeps things orderly." It was a soft gray blouse and black slacks. I wore them, even though I felt like I was stepping into someone else's skin. My duties were manageable. Organize his medication box in the morning, bring coffee at precisely 7:30, oversee breakfast, tidy up the reading room, walk beside him on his rare outings to the garden. He didn't like to be pushed in the chair unless absolutely necessary. "Not an invalid," he grunted on the second day when I offered to help him up the ramp to the patio. "Just slower than I used to be." He didn't talk much, but he watched, always, not in a threatening way, never that, but with quiet, unnerving focus. When I'd enter a room, his gaze would land on me like a thought he hadn't finished yet, and I'd feel that strange pull in my chest again, a tug from something I couldn't quite remember. On the third evening after I brought him his tea, chamomile, no sugar, exactly at 8:15, he said, "You hold the cup like a lefty." I turned, surprised. "I am a lefty." He nodded once, as if he'd just confirmed a theory. On the fourth day, I caught him watching me wipe down the kitchen counter. "You hum when you work," he said, a song I haven't heard in years. I hadn't realized I was humming. It was a lullaby, something my grandmother used to sing in German when I was little. Something buried so deep I only ever remembered it when I was completely alone. That night, I unpacked the last of the boxes I'd brought. There weren't many. Tiffany had let me take exactly what fit into the trunk of my car. Some clothes, a few kitchen things, my mother's old jewelry box, and a shoebox stuffed with photo albums. I hadn't looked at them in years, but something about this house, this man, had stirred the mud at the bottom of the pond. Things I'd buried were starting to float back up. I sat on the plush window seat, my knees tucked under me, and opened the lid. The photos were old, some curling at the corners, others yellowing with age. The first few were from my nursing school graduation. Then came wedding pictures, me in a modest lace dress, Walter in his Navy uniform, both of us impossibly young. Our daughter, Tiffany, as a baby, then a toddler, then gap-toothed in a second-grade costume parade. I flipped through them slowly, heart heavy. Then I found it, tucked between a Thanksgiving photo and a snapshot of me holding a newborn Tiffany in a hospital room. Was another life, a different album. Older, smaller, leather-bound, faded blue. The clasp rusted shut, but still functioning. It had been at the very bottom. I hadn't thought about it in decades. I opened it with careful fingers. The first page, me at 19, hair down to my waist, grinning on a swing set in front of my childhood home. Second page, my college dorm, a cluster of young women smiling with plastic cups in hand. Third page, him, my breath hitched. He had his arm around my shoulders, and I was laughing with my head tilted toward him like I'd never known fear. He wore a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows and had that same confident glint in his eyes. Different name back then. Not Mr. Ashford, not the quiet, brooding man in the chair downstairs. Back then, he was just Julian Reed, and he was mine. I turned another page. We were by the lake, barefoot, my head resting on his chest. Another photo, us at the fair, him holding a paper cone of popcorn, me with chocolate on my chin. Then the one I remembered most clearly, the train station. He was leaving, off to chase business dreams, he'd said. Just a year, 2 at most. He'd kissed my cheek and promised to come back for me. He never did. I stared at the photo so long my eyes burned. It couldn't be him. That Julian had fire in his voice and a rebel streak. This man was colder, sharper, closed off. But the eyes, those pale blue eyes, they hadn't changed, and suddenly I was 20 again, standing at the edge of a platform, heart aching as a train pulled away. I closed the album and held it to my chest, pulse thudding against it like a drum. Could it be? Had Tiffany unknowingly sent me to the one man who had broken me long before she ever had? I didn't know, but I needed to find out. The next morning, I was almost too distracted to pour his coffee correctly. I'd been up half the night with that photo album open across my lap, staring at pages that felt like they'd slipped in from someone else's life. But they were mine. My hands trembled as I buttered his toast. "Shaky hands," Mr. Ashford observed. "Is it the nerves? Or am I just that intimidating?" I forced a smile. "It's just been a long night." He didn't press. He never did. He had this way of asking a question without asking, letting the silence draw answers out of you whether you meant to give them or not. I brought him his tray in the sunroom, as usual. Morning light streamed through the glass walls, painting golden streaks across the floor. He liked to sit facing the garden, where nothing much happened but the occasional rustle of branches. Today, though, he was already turned halfway toward me, watching. "Your hair's different when it's not pulled back," he said as I approached. I glanced down self-consciously. I'd left it loose this morning, some habit from my younger years maybe, or maybe I just needed to feel like someone else for a day. "I used to wear it this way," I said softly, "a long time ago." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Did you always wear yellow?" he asked next. I stopped in my tracks. The sweater. I'd grabbed it on instinct this morning, a soft canary yellow cardigan I hadn't worn in ages. It had been Walter's favorite, though I never understood why. Now here Julian, if it really was him, was asking about it like it meant something. Sometimes, I said carefully. Why? His eyes didn't move from mine. Just reminds me of someone you knew, a long time ago. We stared at each other for a beat too long. I looked away first. As he ate, I busied myself organizing the bookshelf behind him. My hands moved automatically, sliding volumes into line, adjusting the angle of a globe no one had spun in decades. Do you remember your first love? He asked suddenly, without turning around. I nearly dropped a hardcover copy of Wuthering Heights. I composed myself before answering. That's a bold question for breakfast. I didn't say you had to answer. I turned slowly. Yes, I said, I remember him. What happened? I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I answered. He left. A pause. He promised to come back. He didn't. More silence, then a soft murmur. Maybe he tried. I looked at him sharply, but his face was unreadable. What about you? I asked. I had someone, he said, back when I was young, stubborn, thought the world would wait for me while I built an empire. Did it? His mouth lifted into something almost like a smile. Number it didn't. I wanted to ask more. My throat ached with questions, but something in me resisted. I wasn't ready, not yet, to lay the whole truth on the table. I needed to be sure, absolutely sure. That afternoon, I slipped away to my room during his nap and reopened the photo album. This time, I studied the details, the slope of his nose, the way his left eyebrow lifted slightly when he smiled, the fingers on his right hand, long, elegant, with a small scar on the knuckle from when he'd cut himself opening a can of peaches in college. I remembered that moment with such clarity, it startled me. I closed the album again, fingers trembling. Then I pulled out the envelope I'd kept hidden for decades. The letter. His letter. My dearest Eleanor, I did it, just like I promised. I'm coming back for you next month. The house is ready. The business is solid. I'm going to build you the life you deserve. I can't wait to carry you across our threshold. Forever yours, Julian. It had arrived 3 weeks too late. By the time I opened it, I was already married to Walter, already wearing someone else's ring, already stepping into a life that was steady and safe and not built on promises that missed their train stops. I folded the letter back into its envelope and stared at the closed door across the room. If it really was him, if Julian Reed was now Julian Ashford, then I owed it to myself to find out why he never came, why he let me go without a fight, and why now, almost 50 years later, he was looking at me like he'd finally found something he'd lost. Maybe he didn't recognize me yet, or maybe, just maybe, he had and was waiting to see if I'd be brave enough to speak first. I didn't sleep again that night. The letter sat on my nightstand like a live wire. Every time I turned over in bed, I could feel its presence pressing on my thoughts. I'd read it twice, 3 times, then a fourth just to be sure I hadn't imagined the words, the tone, the urgency, the promise. Julian had come back for me. I'd just already vanished. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't keep going like this, pretending we were strangers, skirting around the edges of recognition. I didn't know what I expected to happen if I told him the truth. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But the weight of silence was starting to suffocate me. I found him in the conservatory with a newspaper folded neatly on his lap and a cup of untouched coffee cooling on the table beside him. His chair was angled slightly toward the windows, watching the light crawl across the floor like he had nowhere else to be. Good morning, I said as I approached. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the horizon. Then, softly, I didn't sleep. Me neither. He looked at me then, really looked. It's getting heavier, isn't it? I sat down across from him, the letter still tucked inside my cardigan pocket, burning against my ribs. What is? The knowing. My throat tightened. Yes. He set the paper aside. You were at Westland High, weren't you? Class of '69? I froze. I saw the pin on your old cardigan, the one you wore yesterday. You used to pin it near your collarbone. I touched the edge of my sweater instinctively. I didn't think anyone would notice. I did. He paused, hands resting on the chair's armrests like he was bracing himself. You worked at the town diner the summer of '68, used to hum when you wiped the counters. You hated the cherry syrup bottles because they were always sticky. Tears pricked at my eyes before I could stop them. You liked your coffee black, I said quietly, but you added cream when you were nervous. He smiled, just barely. You used to wear that ridiculous yellow sundress, said it was lucky. It was, I whispered. Julian's voice dropped. Eleanor Jane Davis. The old name felt foreign and intimate all at once. I hadn't heard it in decades, not since before I became Eleanor Wright, before Tiffany, before the safe, settled life that followed. You really remember? I said. How could I forget? His voice cracked slightly, just enough to make me realize he hadn't said it for dramatic effect. It had cost him something to keep that memory intact. You left, I said. The words came out before I could temper them. You promised you'd come back, and then nothing. His eyes closed for a moment, like he was trying to breathe through a memory that still hurt. I did come back, or I tried. I pulled the letter from my pocket and held it out. His breath caught the second he saw the handwriting. I got this 3 weeks after my wedding, I said. It had no return address, just a postmark. By then I'd already married someone else, he finished. I nodded. Julian reached for the letter with both hands, held it like it might disintegrate, then pressed it against his chest. My business partners didn't want me tied down, he said quietly. They intercepted my letters, told me you'd moved on, that you weren't responding because you'd found someone better. I was a liability with a hometown girl waiting in the wings. I didn't know the truth until it was too late. I sat frozen, heart pounding. You mean you never stopped writing? Every week, he said, until I stopped believing I'd get through. I couldn't speak. All these years, he continued, voice low, I thought you'd changed your mind, that maybe I'd been a dream you outgrew, but I couldn't let go. I kept tabs on you, quietly, a PI here and there, just to know you were okay, that you were safe. You followed me? No, he said quickly. Just observed from a distance. I knew when you got married, when your daughter was born, when your husband opened his hardware store. I even knew when he passed. That's when the job listing went out. Greta sent it through an agency. You didn't expect it to be me. He shook his head. Not until you walked through that door. And then? I knew, but I didn't want to scare you. Or worse, misremember and make a fool of myself. So I waited and watched. And let me serve your tea like a stranger? His smile was sad. It was the only way I knew how to keep you near without losing you again. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did a little of both. You could have said something. I was afraid you'd walk away. I almost did. He nodded. I would have deserved it. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind only two people with a shared past can understand. Finally, I reached across and took his hand. It was older now, veined, the knuckles more pronounced but still warm, still familiar. I waited for you, I whispered. I really did. And I came back. Too late, but maybe not too late for this. He squeezed my fingers gently, and I realized we were both trembling. I don't know what this is yet, I said. I'm not even sure what we're doing. Neither am I. But I know one thing, I added. Tiffany thought she was sending me off to a job. Julian's smile deepened. And instead? I squeezed his hand. She handed me back my history. And just like that, the past stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a doorway. The next morning, everything felt quieter. Not in the house. Greta still moved about with her usual militant grace. The gardener's tools still clinked against the stone path outside. But in me, the hum of uncertainty that had followed me since the moment Tiffany shut that kitchen drawer now settled into something else. Not quite peace, but not dread either. When I brought Julian his morning coffee, he was already dressed and waiting in the sunroom, a wool throw over his legs, and a small notepad on his lap. "Punctual," he said, not looking up. "I like that about you." I set the cup down on the table beside him, careful not to spill. "I was always punctual. You just didn't notice back then." That made him smile. A real one this time, soft around the edges. He tapped his pen once against the paper. "I've been thinking. Dangerous." He gave a short laugh. "Possibly, but I'm going to say it anyway." I took the chair opposite him and waited. He looked down at the notepad, then folded it closed and set it aside. "I don't want to keep playing house with memory," he said. "I want to give this a chance, you and me, not as employer and companion, not as strangers clinging to nostalgia." I stiffened slightly. "Julian, I'm not asking for marriage, not today. I'm not proposing anything reckless or romantic or foolish, not yet. But I'd like you to move out of the guest quarters, into the main wing, with me." I blinked. "You want me to live with you?" "Live nearby," he corrected gently. "Not because I need a caretaker, but because I want to see what this is, what we might still be." My mind raced. The idea of it, being seen not as a helper, not as an obligation, but as a woman again, sent an old flutter through my stomach. But so did the risk, the implications. "You think this will be simple?" I asked, "because it won't be. My daughter already thinks I've lost my mind just for being here." He nodded. "She'll think worse if she finds out you're living like a wife. She'll think I'm gold digging." "Then let her." I looked at him sharply. "It's not that easy." "It is for me." "You've never met Tiffany." "No," he said, "but I've seen the damage she left behind, and I don't take kindly to people who treat family like clutter." We sat with that for a moment, his gaze on mine. No pressure, no pleading, just presence, steady, open. "Julian," I said finally, "I came here because I had nowhere else to go, and now you're offering me something I don't even know how to want." "Then let's want it slowly," he said, "one room closer at a time." A silence stretched between us, but this one was warm. It didn't demand a decision, just a breath. "All right," I said, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "You let me cook dinner tonight, something real, no chefs, no staff." His smile was instant. "I'd forgotten how bossy you were." I stood. "You're about to remember a lot more than that." Dinner was a quiet triumph. Julian sat at the small, round table near the back terrace, the sunset lighting his silver hair in warm hues. I'd made roast chicken, roasted carrots with honey and thyme, and a bread pudding that had earned a contented grunt from him on the second bite. No staff, no ceremony. Just the two of us, plates scraped clean, memories drifting in with the candlelight. We didn't talk about the past or the future, just little things, weather, books, the absurdity of the wine label Greta had picked out. "Hand harvested by monks," Julian scoffed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like a woman again. Not a burden, not a nurse, just Eleanor. But the moment didn't last. The next morning, Greta met me in the hallway, a curious edge to her otherwise impenetrable tone. "You've had a visitor." My heart stalled. "Who?" She didn't give a name, just said she was family, said she'd be back. I felt my blood run cold. There was only one person who would show up uninvited without warning and claim the word family like it was a threat. Tiffany. She came all the way here? From what I gathered, she's local. She must have followed you. Number not followed. Investigated. Tracked. Tiffany had friends in real estate, in every social circle that mattered. It wouldn't have taken her long to sniff out the address once she got curious enough. "What did she say?" I asked. Greta looked mildly irritated. "She asked questions, lots of them. Who lives here? What you do here? Whether you have your own room? Whether Mr. Ashford is vulnerable." I closed my eyes and pressed 2 fingers to my temple. "She's going to think I'm trying to marry him for his money," I muttered. "She didn't say it outright," Greta replied, "but she didn't need to." Of course. Tiffany couldn't stomach the idea of me living in a house this grand without assuming I'd schemed my way into it. In her mind, love was just leverage, and I was disposable the minute I stopped being convenient. She'll be back, I said quietly. Greta nodded. She said as much. That afternoon, I found Julian on the back patio, reading. I told him everything. No more tiptoeing. He listened without interrupting, though I could see his jaw tightening with every word. She's going to make this ugly, I said. She'll twist everything. She'll paint me as some manipulative opportunist who preyed on a grieving man in a wheelchair. Julian set down his book, his hands steady, his voice colder than I'd heard it yet. She can try. She's persuasive. I'm wealthier. That's not funny. It's not a joke. He looked at me, and there was steel behind his calm. I didn't build this house, this life, this empire just to let a woman like Tiffany bulldoze through it with suspicion and inherited entitlement. She's my daughter, and you're my history. That stopped me. I don't want this to become a war, I said softly. Then she should come with peace. But Tiffany never did anything gently. She came back 2 days later, her heels echoing across the marble as Greta led her into the drawing room like a package that had arrived damaged. I stood when she entered. She didn't hug me, didn't smile. Well, she said, voice cool and eyes scanning the space, you've certainly upgraded. Julian wheeled in from the hallway behind me, posture regal, expression unreadable. Miss Wright, he said, I assume you'd like to discuss your concerns? Tiffany's gaze flicked between us. Oh, I'm not here to cause trouble. That was when I knew. She'd already started, and trouble was exactly what she brought with her. Tiffany crossed the drawing room like she owned it. She wore a black blazer, sleek slacks, and a blouse that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her hair was tied back tight, no strand out of place, and her lips were painted a severe matte mauve that somehow made her smile look even colder. Julian greeted her with the cool professionalism of a man used to difficult board meetings. Miss Wright, he said, please sit. Tiffany raised an eyebrow at the chair he indicated, like she expected it to bite her. She sat anyway, crossing her legs slowly and folding her hands in her lap with performative poise. Her eyes darted to me, then back to him. I want to start by saying I'm here as a daughter, she said. Not to interfere, just to understand what exactly is going on here. Julian gave a polite nod. That's fair. I've heard things, she continued, from neighbors, from a few community members, about my mother's living arrangement here, about this companionship. She said the word like it had teeth. I just want to make sure she's not being taken advantage of. Julian's expression didn't change. Would you like to clarify who you believe is doing the taking? I'm not accusing anyone, Tiffany said quickly, but my mother is grieving, and she's vulnerable right now, emotionally, financially. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Tiffany, you threw me out of your house 3 weeks after your father's funeral. Her gaze snapped to mine. Because I wanted you to get back on your feet, to rebuild your independence. No, I said, you wanted me gone. You saw me as a burden. She waved her hand like brushing away an irrelevant insect. We're not here to rehash that. Then why are you here? Julian asked calmly. She took a breath, clearly trying to keep the veneer of civility intact. I'd like to speak candidly, woman to woman, she said, looking at me now. Do you truly believe it's appropriate to move in with a man you barely know, weeks after losing your husband? I didn't move in as his partner, I replied. I moved in as his caregiver, because I had no other option, one that you arranged, I might add. I didn't expect you to use that opportunity to find a romantic attachment. Neither did I said. Tiffany looked to Julian. Do you understand how this appears, Mr. Ashford? A woman your age, grieving, alone, suddenly involved with a wealthy employer? Julian tilted his head. And do you understand how it appears that a daughter discarded her mother and now resents the fact that someone else didn't? Tiffany flushed. I just want to make sure my mother's not making a mistake she can't undo. I stepped forward. Tiffany, the mistake was assuming that I wouldn't survive without your approval. She turned to me, voice tightening. You're being reckless. You're living in a fantasy. Better than living in fear, I said quietly. Tiffany's face hardened. If you care about your future, you'll walk away from this before it becomes permanent. Julian spoke then, each word deliberate. Miss Wright, let me make something very clear. Your mother is not beholden to you. She is not under your authority. She is not weak. And she is certainly not confused. She is a grown woman who has the right to choose how she spends the remainder of her life. Tiffany's voice dropped an octave. And if she chooses wrong, that's her risk to take, not yours. She stood abruptly. I can't believe this. You've known her for what, weeks? I've known her for half a lifetime. Tiffany blinked. What are you talking about? Julian glanced at me. I gave him a small nod. Eleanor and I were in love once, he said, before you were even born. Tiffany looked at me like I'd just confessed to arson. You knew him back then? I met her gaze. I did. He was the man I thought I'd marry before your father. And you didn't think that was important to mention? I didn't know it was him at first. Tiffany looked between us, then let out a sharp, humorless laugh. So this isn't just a late life fling. This is some long-lost lover's soap opera nonsense. You're angry because you can't control this, I said. Because for once, my happiness doesn't require your permission. Tiffany's hands curled into fists at her sides. You're throwing away everything for a man in a wheelchair. Watch yourself, Julian said quietly, the words full of warning. I'm not trying to insult you, she said quickly. I'm trying to protect her. No, I said, stepping forward. You're trying to protect your pride, because it's easier to believe I'm being manipulated than to admit you underestimated me. Again. She stared at me, stunned. Julian rolled closer to her, slowly but purposefully. I've already rewritten my will, he said. Everything goes to charity, not to Eleanor, not to anyone else. So if this is about money, walk away now. Tiffany's lips parted. You told her to do that? I insisted, I said, because I wanted you to know the truth. She stared at me, disbelief turning slowly into something uglier. You think this ends with me backing off? I'm not going to sit quietly while you throw yourself into some romantic fantasy with a man you haven't seen in 50 years. Then don't sit quietly, I said, but you'll do it from outside this house. Silence. Thick, sharp, brutal. Tiffany took a step back, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. You're choosing him over me. No, I said, I'm choosing myself. She turned toward the door, then stopped, her voice trembling with something between fury and disbelief. Don't expect me to come back and clean up the mess when it all falls apart. I won't, I said. I finally learned how to clean up my own messes, starting with the one you left behind. The door slammed so hard the windows shook. Julian exhaled slowly. Well, that went about as expected. I dropped into the armchair, exhausted but oddly light. She'll be back. Maybe, he said. But when she does, I added, it'll be on my terms. Julian rolled to my side and reached for my hand. No, he said gently. It'll be on yours. After the door slammed, the silence left behind was almost sacred. No one moved, no one spoke. The storm had passed, but it had taken something with it. Some old, invisible weight that had pressed on my chest for years, maybe decades. Julian remained beside me, his hand still wrapped around mine, warm and steady. He didn't speak right away, just watched me the way he always did, like I was a story he remembered once, but couldn't stop reading again. How do you feel? He finally asked. I thought about it. I scanned my body for signs of regret, guilt, even fear. But what I found was relief. I feel free, I said, for the first time in years. He nodded. She'll be back, you know. I know. She's proud. So am I. I leaned back in the chair and looked around the room, the crown molding, the heavy curtains, the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. Everything about this house had once felt like a museum. Now it felt like a home, not because of the furniture, but because I'd earned the right to exist here, not as someone's mother, not as a live-in helper, but as myself. I never imagined it'd be like this, I said softly. That things would fall apart and then somehow fall together. That's life, Julian said. It rarely rebuilds the same shape. I looked at him. The years had carved his face deeper than I remembered, but the soul behind his eyes, steady, loyal, stubborn, hadn't aged a day. He had waited for me, whether he meant to or not. And somehow, I had found my way back to him. What happens now? I asked. That depends, he said. Are you still planning to sleep in the guest wing? I smiled. I haven't decided yet. Well, he said, shifting his chair slightly. No pressure. But I had the mattress replaced in the master suite. You did not. Memory foam, he said with mock seriousness. High end, supposed to help with back pain, heartbreak, and starting over. I laughed, actually laughed. And when I did, something inside me unclenched. Maybe Tiffany would come back in a week, maybe in a month, or maybe she wouldn't come back at all. I didn't know. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to chase that answer down. I looked at the man in front of me, this impossible chapter reopened after 50 years, and realized I hadn't just survived what Tiffany did to me. I had reclaimed what came before her. My voice, my worth, and the life I thought I'd lost the moment he boarded that train so long ago. You win, I said, squeezing his hand. Julian grinned. About what? I'm staying. Good, he said, because I've waited too damn long to lose you again. And just like that, the piece didn't feel like fallout. It felt like a beginning. 3 weeks later, we were married. No big announcements, no guests, no champagne toasts or flower petals or dramatic walk down the aisle. Just a quiet ceremony in the back garden under the arbor that Julian said hadn't been used since his sister's engagement party in 1984. Patricia and his lawyer signed as witnesses. Greta stood off to the side, arms crossed, looking like she disapproved, until I saw the corners of her mouth twitch up just once when we exchanged rings. Julian wore a navy blazer. I wore a simple cream dress I'd bought years ago and never had an occasion for. It wasn't the wedding I imagined at 20. It wasn't the one I had at 25, but it was the right one for who we were now. Afterward, we had coffee and lemon cake in the conservatory. The windows steamed slightly from the warmth, and the afternoon light filtered through the glass like something cinematic. Julian reached across the table and touched my hand without a word. He didn't need to say anything. Neither did I. I moved into the master wing that night. My suitcase had already been unpacked, my clothes folded into drawers that still smelled faintly of cedar and old aftershave. His space had become ours almost effortlessly, as if it had just been waiting. For the first time in years, I slept without waking. I expected Tiffany to call when the marriage license posted to the public record. She didn't. I expected a letter or a dramatic voicemail. Nothing. Just silence, which, in its own way, was more unsettling. She'll come, I told Julian one morning as we sat on the patio. She's not done. He only nodded. Let her. But I wasn't ready for the knock on the door when it finally came. Patricia found me in the conservatory, hands deep in a tray of newly potted basil and lavender. She spoke softly, like she was telling me a delicate weather report. There's someone at the door, she said. She's asking for you. I wiped my hands on my apron, heart thudding harder than I cared to admit. Who is it? She hesitated. Your daughter. I looked out the window. Tiffany was standing on the front step, arms folded, her eyes sweeping over the house with that familiar glint of judgment I hadn't missed. She looked thinner, more tired. Her sharpness had dulled around the edges. Do you want me to turn her away? Patricia asked. No, I said. This one's mine. I found Julian in his study, reading the quarterly reports for the foundation he'd established last month. She's here, I said simply. He didn't look up. Do you want me there? Yes, I said, but let me speak first. He closed the folder and wheeled around to face me. Then let's go meet the storm. But as we stepped into the foyer, I wasn't sure it was a storm anymore. Tiffany looked like a woman who hadn't come to fight. She looked like a woman who had finally come to listen. Tiffany sat on the edge of the velvet settee in the formal living room, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, I half expected her knuckles to crack. She didn't look like herself. No armor, no blowout, no perfectly coordinated outfit. Just my daughter, stripped bare by something I didn't understand yet. Congratulations, she said stiffly, eyes flicking to the gold band on my finger. I heard it was tasteful. It was quiet, I replied. That's what we wanted. She nodded once, then looked down at the carpet. I didn't come to fight, she said. I know I earned what you said to me. I know I've been, she swallowed, cruel, unfair. Julian sat beside me, silent but solid. She didn't look at him. I went through Dad's things after you left, she continued. I was angry. I was trying to make sense of everything. You, him, all of it. My stomach tightened. And I found letters, she said, barely above a whisper. Love letters to someone named Gwen, dated 2 years before he passed. The name hit me like a cold slap. Gwen. She'd been his co-worker, the one I always had a strange feeling about, the one who lingered too long at the door, who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. I'd asked once. He denied it, said I was imagining things, that she was harmless. Was it an affair? I asked, voice quiet. Tiffany nodded. It wasn't just flirting. He wrote about missing her, wanting to leave everything behind. I don't know if it ever got physical, but emotionally, she looked up at me. He left you years before he died. The room felt like it tilted. I reached for Julian's hand without even thinking. I'm sorry, Tiffany said. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I thought you should know. It should have broken me, the knowledge, the betrayal. But instead, what washed over me was relief. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it made sense now. The quiet distance in his final years, the sudden coldness, the way he'd started locking his phone, deleting emails. I hadn't imagined it. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. Thank you, I said, for telling me. She blinked, surprised. You're not angry? I was angry for a long time, I said. I just didn't know who to be angry with. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that comes after glass shatters. I was jealous of you, she said suddenly. Jealous that you could just move on, start over, find someone. I didn't move on, I said gently. I clawed my way forward. I had to, because you made it clear there was no going back. Her eyes welled up. I blamed you for not being enough to keep him faithful, for being too much when you needed comfort. And then I punished you for surviving it. She was crying now, raw, unguarded, stripped of all pretense. I stood and crossed the room, sat beside her, and wrapped my arms around her. She didn't resist. I'm sorry, Mama, she whispered. And for the first time in months, she felt like my daughter again. I forgive you, I said, but we move forward from here. No more punishment, no more shame. She nodded into my shoulder, and for the first time, we both started telling the truth. The next few weeks unfolded quietly. Tiffany started coming around more often, at first just to talk, then to visit with the children. She didn't bring gifts. She brought presents. She sat with me on the patio while I trimmed the lavender pots, helped me rearrange the books in the library, even took Greta's frostiness like a soldier in training. She was trying, in her own halting way, to rebuild something she'd nearly bulldozed. Julian never rushed her. He never played the role of possessive stepfather or wounded party. He gave her space, but when she spoke, he listened. And when she apologized to him, awkward, fumbling, eyes brimming, he simply nodded and said, It's never too late to see things clearly. One Sunday afternoon, she brought the kids. They tumbled through the house like sunlight, full of noise and sticky fingers and curiosity about the man in the chair. Julian, to his credit, lit up in a way I hadn't seen before. He told stories, asked questions, let the youngest sit on his lap, and press the joystick forward until they were giggling down the hall at turtle speed. At dinner, Tiffany leaned toward me as Julian helped the kids fold cloth napkins into strange little animal shapes. "He really loves you," she said, voice quiet. "It's not a phase, not grief. It's real." I looked at her, really looked, and realized she meant it. "I know," I said. "I feel it every day." She nodded. "I'm happy for you, Mama." And this time, I believed her. Later that evening, after the house had emptied and Julian and I sat beneath the garden lights, sipping tea with our fingers intertwined, I turned to him. "Do you think we did it?" I asked. "Did what?" "Got through it, found the ending we were supposed to find." He tilted his head. "This doesn't feel like an ending to me." "No." He shook his head. "It feels like we're finally at the beginning. The real one." I smiled. "Took us long enough." Good things usually do. I looked around at the house that had once felt like a museum, at the life that had started in the ashes of everything I thought was over. I thought about Walter. I thought about the life I'd lived for so long, the quiet sacrifices, the swallowed words, the guilt that clung to me even when no one asked for it. I thought about the woman I used to be. Then I looked at Julian, the man who had waited, the man I had waited for, whether I admitted it or not. "I never thought I'd get this," I whispered. "Not after everything." He looked at me, blue eyes steady. "You didn't get this, Eleanor. You took it. You survived enough to claim it." And he was right. I didn't fall into this life. I earned it through heartbreak and rejection and the cold sting of being cast aside by my own child. I rebuilt myself brick by careful brick on top of the ruins. And in doing so, I found something most people never get back. Love. Real, patient, relentless love. We sat in silence as the sun dipped below the hedge, casting long shadows across the stone path. Julian squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, steady and sure. The past hadn't disappeared. It had finally found a home inside the woman I had become and the life I was no longer afraid to live. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something like this? Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, I've left 2 of my other stories on screen. I promise they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching all the way to the end.